I have been using a wet palette for most of my hobby career, and it was an absolute game changer. There are a ton of products out there, I own a few, but the one that is my favorite was basically free. Hey guys, Jay here, welcome to EonsOfBattle. If you paint minis, you should be using a wet palette. It'll make your paint go further, it'll make blending and creating colors much easier, it's the only way to get really good at glazing, and it's incredibly cheap. The best wet palette in the world is, drumroll please, dun 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 dun, Reynolds parchment paper. This is your palette paper, the only thing left is to get yourself a paper towel and a plate. Now this wrap can be found for as cheap as $2.98 for a 30-foot roll. And let's do the math. I bought this 30 feet of Reynolds parchment paper for about $3. I cut the roll in half, so it's actually 60 feet. That's 720 inches, and I only use 4 inches to make a palette. So that is 180 wet palettes I can make, and I use each palette for about a week or two. It is that cheap, it's super easy too, so let's set up a wet palette. First, I fold the paper towel in half to put on my plate. Then I pour enough water to fully saturate it. It's also important to keep the towel perfectly flat. This is why I really like to use a plate, so that it has a super flat bottom. This will make the palette easier to build. Then I take my palette paper, Reynolds wrap, and I cut myself a square big enough to have enough parchment to cover 75% of my paper towel. That 25% is important. Usually I saturate my parchment paper by running it under the sink, but you can also dunk it in some water. I then spread it over the palette and run my fingers across it to get out any air bubbles and make sure that it lies perfectly flat. I can't handle any wrinkles in my palette. It just makes it so much harder to use. Now the palette is set up, but you have to take a paper towel to squeegee off the excess water droplets. Then hang on to that paper towel for dry brushing or cleaning up mistakes. The palette is now perfect and ready for paint. When working with a wet palette, you want to leave your paint as drops for as long as possible. If you flatten out the paint, it'll dry no matter how much water you put on the paper towel. And that 25% paper towel showing is invaluable for scooping up water to thin your paints, turning them into glazes or washes. And this is why I like paper towel as opposed to sponges from other companies. I can just throw this away when it gets nasty and full of paint, but the reusable sponge just becomes a mess. Now when I'm finished painting, I actually take a piece of glass and set it on top. I use some glass I had laying around, but a plastic lid would work too. This helps the paint from drying up, but you really have to learn your paint. I usually leave a little bit uncovered. If it's completely covered, you'll come back with puddles of paint because nothing has evaporated and it's just been soaking up water all night long. You have to get the evaporation point just right, and not every paint color is gonna last. Now speaking of reusability, the palette paper can last a while. If I'm feeling too lazy to cut myself a new square, I can just rinse the palette off if I'm done with those colors. Or I've also just taken the palette paper and flipped it upside down. Boom, just like that, it's like a new piece. Now the wet palette is not a miracle product. It won't keep your paint wet forever. If you live somewhere really hot or really dry, you might still struggle to keep paint from drying out. And some colors just don't like the air. I find brown paints particularly hard to keep hydrated. But a wet palette should keep your paints nice and workable even for the longer painting sessions. And before dropping big money on a premium product, I would try out one of these homemade palettes to get the hang of it. We make tutorials like these every single week. If you find them helpful, you might consider supporting us over on Patreon. Over there you'll gain access to some behind the scenes and other exciting exclusive content. But that's all for this video. Give wet palettes a try, and as always, thanks for watching.